It's a free country. In this video, we're gonna get to the hardcore facts about heat damage versus heat training. People think that there's no difference and it's the same thing. If your curls are no longer there, then your hair is damaged, and that is simply not true. Let's get into this. Part 1, heat damage versus heat training. Always get you some water before we get started, because I don't want you to have no attitude and I don't want you to get parched. Before we get started, make sure you go ahead and subscribe here to my channel, and once you subscribe, be sure to click on that bell notification so you're notified every single time I post another video. This is a really big argument.
Heat damage, heat training, is it the same thing? Or if you have a relaxer, or if you have heat trained hair, if your curl's not there, then your hair is damaged.
Well, guess what, baby girl? That ain't true.
There are 3 forms of damage. We have chemical damage, heat damage, and mechanical damage. In this video, we're going to be focusing more on heat damage. But if you want to learn more about mechanical damage, check the links in the description box below. And let me know in the comments below if you feel like you need a little bit more than that. But let's get to the point. The main thing that you need to be focused on as it pertains to damage is damage to your hair's cuticle. So I know you're probably wondering, what is my hair's cuticle? Well, your hair is made up of keratin, and your cuticle is made up of dead keratin cells. Your cuticle has different layers of porosity. If you want to know a little bit more about porosity, make sure you go ahead and download this ebook right here, because it'll explain porosity in grave detail for you. Okay, how can you damage the cuticle, you ask? I thought you would never ask. Your cuticle layer is the first line of defense when it comes to the health of your hair, because your cuticle's #1 job is to protect the hair shaft where all of the good stuff happens. Because we are putting so many cuts and holes in the hair's cuticle, it leaves our hair shaft susceptible to a lot of different forms of damage. When you damage the cuticle, you create cuts and holes and nicks on the cuticle layer of the hair that is meant to protect the hair shaft. This is what's within the hair shaft. So this is everything that your cuticle is meant to protect. But by you being natural and by you using all of these home remedies and all of these products that are meant to grow the hair, what you're actually doing is creating holes and nicks within the hair's cuticle. So in return, whenever you say,
I've been heat free and I've been doing all of my natural stuff
for the last 3 years, and then you go to put heat on your hair, you get heat damage instantly because you have all of these holes and gaps in the hair. So it makes it almost impossible for you to protect your hair properly from heat, and that is the reality of heat damage. But I want to break it down a little bit more for you. We have 3 bonds that hold the hair together. To understand it a little more and to get a more detailed video about it is in the description box too. So not to get too scientific on you, but your hair is made up of different polypeptide chains, and these polypeptide chains are held together by 3 bonds: the disulfide bond, the hydrogen bond, the salt bond. Okay, now the salt bond is the bond in the hair that we actually ignore a lot, and the salt bond is the bond that most naturals manipulate the most, which leads to holes and breakage and so many other things inside of the hair shaft. We have permanent linkages and we have temporary linkages. The hydrogen bond and the salt bond fall under the category of a temporary linkage, whereas the disulfide bond falls under the category of permanent linkages. The temporary linkages can be broken by water. When you go in to see a hairstylist, a cosmetologist, whatever you want to call it, the different forms of temporary breakages or temporary linkages that she does would be considered wet setting or dry setting. When you wet set the hair or when you dry set the hair, you take the hair from alpha keratin to beta keratin. Alpha keratin is your hair's natural state. How your hair is naturally when it's wet and it's just sitting on your head, boom, shablam, hello. That is your hair in alpha keratin. Beta keratin is the new form that your hair is in after it's been stretched out. Now, how can you stretch it out? How do you get the hair from alpha keratin to beta keratin? You get the hair from alpha keratin to beta keratin in two ways. They're wet setting or dry setting. Wet setting would be your roller sets, your straw sets, your twist outs and things of that nature. And dry setting would be your blowouts and your silk presses. Now, this is where things get a little complicated, and this is where the whole heat damage and all of this stuff comes into play. We already talked about taking the hair from alpha keratin to beta keratin when it comes to breaking these temporary bonds. What you're going to do with a silk press, you're going to make sure that the hair is properly prepared. There are so many people telling you guys, oh, you don't need a heat protector to blow dry. Yes, you do. There are certain procedures that you need to follow whenever you are taking the hair from alpha keratin to beta keratin. And one of the main reasons why so many people have heat damage and so many people are afraid of heat damage is there is a very, very small amount of people who understand how to properly take the hair from alpha keratin to beta keratin. And what's happening is the natural hair community has came out and told you guys, oh, skip these steps. You can skip all of these steps because they're just here to make money, where in reality, you can't skip certain steps because you straightening your hair, you are breaking temporary bonds and you are taking the hair from alpha keratin to beta keratin. So while you're doing that, you need to make sure that you have the proper products to help you do that and the proper techniques and procedures to help you do that, because products will not give you the perfect silk press or help you avoid heat damage, and just seeing how to hold the flat iron will not help you do it. It is a combination of the two. This is where heat damage comes into play. Heat damage comes into play when you have not properly prepared the hair to go from alpha keratin to beta keratin. So in that case, instead of your silk press appointment being the type of appointment that breaks the bonds in the hair temporarily, you end up moving over to breaking the disulfide bond instead of messing with the hydrogen bond. That is the issue. Because we don't understand the bonds in the hair, we do not understand which techniques and which procedures are going to break the temporary linkages and which procedures are going to break the permanent linkages. This is where we come into an issue. If you do the silk press properly, you are only supposed to be manipulating a temporary linkage, but if you do it wrong, you go over and you end up manipulating a permanent linkage. So yes, it's really, really easy. It looks really, really easy online to do a silk press, but the reality of it is there are people, whether they went to cosmetology school or whether they're just really, really good at doing the silk press, they know how to only break that temporary linkage. But if you go too far, you end up not just breaking that temporary linkage, but you end up breaking the permanent linkage, which is the disulfide bond. The disulfide bond is broken with a relaxer when you get hair color. And the thing about this is, when it comes to a relaxer, everybody thinks that just because somebody has a relaxer, their hair is damaged, and that's not true. You can see how hair looks, and this is actually my microscope. So really quick, look at this picture right here and see the difference between a damaged cuticle and a healthy cuticle. This relaxed hair under a microscope resembles a healthy cuticle. Just because you relax your hair does not mean that your hair is damaged, but you can over process your hair because, once again, everyone kind of thinks that they are an expert in every field, whereas most people relax their hair wrong, because most people think that whenever you relax your hair, you're supposed to get it 100% straight, and that is not true. You're only supposed to get the hair a certain percentage straight. You're only supposed to remove a certain amount of the curls, and once you go past that certain amount, you begin to create holes inside of the hair's cuticle, which leads to breakage. Anytime you are dealing with the bonds in the hair at all, whether it is is a temporary linkage or a permanent linkage, you need to make sure that you are putting back into your hair things that you've taken out. So the problem with heat damage or the problem with color is most people think that they can do it at home themselves without any proper training, and they also think that once they color their hair, that's it. Whereas once you color your hair, once you change anything, once you change either a temporary linkage or a permanent linkage, you need to make sure that you're giving your hair the nutrition and the botanicals that it needs. The only way you can do that is if you know what your hair thrives on. And the only way you can know that is if you know your porosity, low porosity, medium porosity, or high porosity. So this is why whenever people ask the question or whenever people make the comment, oh, it's the same thing, heat damage and heat training. No, it is not the same thing, because once again, just because the bonds in your hair are deconstructed, just because the bonds in your hair are reconstructed, does not mean your hair is damaged. There's a difference between damage to the cuticle and your bonds being moved around. The reality of it is, if you do have heat damage, you do not need to shave your entire head. I love you guys. I'm so excited that the natural community came along and gave Black women the confidence that we needed to wear our hair natural, but we cannot turn our back on the science of hair. We are not some type of weird creature created that came from the tombs of Africa, okay? Like, Lord, there is a pattern that you follow for healthy hair growth, and there is a pattern that you follow to straighten your hair. And if you do not have the proper patterns when you are breaking the temporary linkage in your hair, giving yourself a silk press or giving yourself a roller set or a twist out, you will damage the hair. Wash and goes. A lot of naturals think that wash and goes is the #1 thing for you to do to your hair, but what you guys do not understand is what your wash and goes are actually one of the things that, we'll get to that, but that's not what we were talking about. And there is no difference. With heat training, you purposely follow procedures. With heat damage, you made a mistake and you were only supposed to be breaking the temporary linkages, and you made a mistake and broke the permanent linkages. That's heat damage. But with heat training, you took proper steps and you took specific steps to break the permanent linkages in your hair, aka the disulfide bond. That is the difference between heat training and heat damage. And in my opinion, you guys need another word, because the word heat damage does not ring true. Because just because the curls are not the same does not mean that your hair is damaged. For example, this girl here and this girl here, I'll leave their channels linked below because I really want you to go watch them. They made a decision that they just didn't want to do the natural thing to grow their hair out. They wanted to do relaxers, and then the other one wanted to do heat training. And as you can see, both of these Black women have long, beautiful hair, and it is not just because of genetics. I'm gonna end there because I want you guys to have a conversation about that in the comments. Do you think that the only way that you can have long hair is if you are genetically inclined to having long hair? I'm gonna let you know that there is a little bit of truth to that. However, your genetics have a little bit to do with how long your hair is, but it is not because God said, oh, if you have this genetic mixture, you will not have long hair. It is simply because when your hair is a certain texture, there are certain patterns that you need to follow to retain length. And the truth of the matter is, certain people with certain curl patterns do not have the proper patterns that they need to follow to retain length.